Greetings everyone, this is Jed Schlackman, and in this video clip I will be speaking about a topic which I'm labeling Unveiling, Understanding, and Forgiving the Illuminati and other shadowy teachers. That may sound like a somewhat confusing or provocative title. However, as I go through this discussion, we'll get to understand more clearly what I'm referring to. To begin with, we can look at this idea or concept of the Illuminati, which has become somewhat well known or popular in our modern culture. Nowadays we have musicians and celebrities and other people talking about what they consider to be the Illuminati. And of course there are different viewpoints and different perspectives. People that study history and current events have their ideas about who and what the Illuminati are. And then there are people who are whistleblowers, people who in some way have been a part of or have been connected to that type of secret society organization and are sharing their experience or what they claim to be their experience. I've personally encountered or known people who have had some connection to groups that would be considered to be in some way part of the Illuminati. And having done a lot of research on the topic of spirituality and metaphysics and occult history, I've put together a lot of different information sources and observations based on my own interactions with people to create a more holistic idea of what the Illuminati is, what it was, what it may come to be, and what significance that has for all of us who are experiencing life and society here on planet Earth. So with that in mind, I'll first recommend some useful references or other places to research this topic of the Illuminati. One would be Stuart Swerdlow. Stuart has written a few books related to that topic. One of them is called Blue Blood, True Blood. That one was published around the year 2000. And another book he has is called 13 Cubed, which relates to the experience of people that he's worked with who have been under mind control. There are also books by David Icke, who's probably one of the most well-known and controversial speakers on this topic. David Wilcock is another writer, researcher, and speaker who has delved into this subject, and he's become more prominent in recent years due to his online appearances on Gaiam TV and also his appearances on the History Channel series Ancient Aliens. Wilcock is actually someone who appears to be incarnationally connected to the famous psychic and seer Edgar Cayce. Another resource on the Illuminati would be books by people who have been subjected to some of their mind control programs or who have studied and researched those programs. This includes books by Fritz Springmeier. Fritz wrote a book called Bloodlines of the Illuminati, as well as a couple of books on the Illuminati's methods or formula for creating mind control slaves and how that process of abusing and causing dissociation occurs, and how someone could help the people who have been subjected to that recover their psychological well-being. a couple of other people who have written on the mind control part are Kathy O'Brien and Mark Phillips, who co-authored 2 books. One is Transformation of America, the other is Access Denied. And there's Bryce Taylor, who wrote a book called Thanks for the Memories, which details her experiences being subjected to mind control. There are a few other people who have written books along that vein. And it's a topic that's disturbing for a lot of people, but it's helpful to understand how on some level all of us are being influenced to have certain beliefs or certain patterns of behavior in our lives. And a lot of it's very subtle and not very forceful or coercive as it might be with some of those people who are specifically programmed. And to understand how people can be manipulated or guided to do certain things or act in certain ways, it's very valuable to look into this topic of mind control, of trauma and dissociation, since mind control is really the foundation of any civilization or society. So for any society to perpetuate itself, to maintain its structure, particularly if there is a power structure in that society, it's essential to use some form of psychological manipulation or programming. Now within the Illuminati society, they're using these methods on themselves, on their own families and members, as well as some form of programming for the general public. They also use a lot of mafia or organized crime type of methods to manipulate people. So for people that are not programmed to want to do things on their own, they might use the carrot or stick approach, giving someone some type of reward or bribe, or providing some type of aversive stimulus, I should say, something that's a form of punishment or threat if they don't comply. Looking into the history of this secret society structure of the Illuminati, those who have explained it point out that it's something that has evolved over time. However, it has its origins in deep antiquity, in ancient times, going back into some of the ancient civilizations such as Babylon, Sumeria, ancient Egypt, and perhaps back into the Atlantean era, a civilization that existed before a great global cataclysm, and that was a cataclysm that occurred approximately 13,000 years ago. So with that, a lot of our planetary history got buried in the rubble, so to speak. A lot of knowledge got lost or suppressed, and those who have rebuilt civilization since that time have often sought to suppress that true history, a history which involves the influence of different extraterrestrial groups here on this planet, how they have influenced or molded the development of human societies. The Illuminati are a group that believes that they are descended from extraterrestrials. Stuart Swerdlow and some other people who have been informants about the Illuminati consider it to be a hybrid race. So they're human beings who have a high amount of genetics, a high amount of DNA from a certain extraterrestrial group that was influential on our planet. So he calls them human-reptilian hybrids. That would be dating back to a period around 6,000 years ago, where the survivors of that Atlantean cataclysm began to re-establish major civilizations on our planet. In conventional Western history, we're taught about Sumeria, and that was supposedly the first civilization. However, there's a lot of evidence of civilizations much more ancient than that, which got destroyed. The Atlantean civilization would be one of the older global type civilizations, and there was another one which is often referred to as Lemuria, also sometimes called Mu, or the Mother Civilization. Those civilizations existed many thousands of years ago, and they had a much more overt connection with extraterrestrials than our modern civilizations do. In modern times, things are kept much more secret, much more hidden, which is sort of what the role of secret societies is, to keep certain information hidden only to a select few. Now, whether that group is positive or negative, of course, depends on the perspective of the person making that value judgment. To themselves, they may think that what they're doing is benevolent or serving a greater good. Perhaps they believe they are wiser and more deserving of being in a position to rule society. This is the idea behind the divine right of kings, the claim that different royalties or aristocracies have used to justify their feudal rule, their ability to be in power and to accumulate massive amounts of material wealth, while many of their subjects languish in poverty. Most people on our planet do not share that type of belief system. So for those that do hold that type of belief system, they would have to keep it secret. In essence, they might choose to live a double life, where they present one persona or facade to the general public, yet they have a completely different persona that they operate with in private or within their elite circles, within their secret society or family group. One way to make that split personality even more powerful, more real or convincing in a certain sense would be to program oneself to have multiple personalities, not fake multiple personalities, but actually true, genuine personalities that exist within the same person, but which function independently of one another. In psychology, this is referred to as dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder. A person who is experiencing that condition would have different personality alters which function in different situations. So in one situation, the person might appear to be a very gentle, compassionate, conservative Christian, while in another setting, that same person could be very aggressive, they might be very angry and foul-mouthed, and they might even participate in certain types of satanic rituals where they do things that would be absolutely horrific to someone who comes from a regular Christian perspective. So those two completely opposing or different personalities can exist in the same person, and they may be completely unaware of one another. In the late part of the 20th century, it was well documented that the Central Intelligence Agency here in America was conducting research under programs that were referred to under the umbrella term MK Ultra, where they were actually deliberately creating multiple personality disordered persons. Psychiatrist Colin Ross wrote about that in a book called Bluebird, as Bluebird was the subclassification for the program that focused on that particular type of research. So they were using established psychiatrists who were working for the agency to expose people to different traumas, drugs, hypnosis, and other things that would be used to program those personalities. Creating a person with that type of psychological structure is something that could be seen as useful or valuable in the intelligence business. For example, if you're having an agent who's conducting surveillance in a foreign country and that agent is somehow caught and detained, if you can program them to be able to flip personalities and not remember who they are or what they're doing or things like that, that could help protect their cover. It could help them keep secret things that otherwise they might have been forced to expose. Now, this is something that is not exclusive to the CIA. This is something that has been researched and practiced by a variety of groups where they've intentionally created people with these multiple personalities. Within the Illuminati culture, this is something that has become widespread. So there are a significant amount of people within that culture who have been programmed in this way, who are both victims and perpetrators of mind control, victims and perpetrators of abuse. So these people are often seriously psychologically disturbed. However, they have this dissociative skill of presenting a personality that seems very normal, very convincing to the casual observer. There are also people within that culture who are just simply psychopathic or sociopathic, who are very conscious of who they are and what they're doing, and it's something they feel completely comfortable with, something that feels normal, natural to them. For a person who's brought up in everyday society, who's taught the values that seem common to that society, which are mostly pro-social values, values like honesty, empathy, and compassion, having integrity, speaking the truth, things like that. It's hard to believe that there are a significant percentage of the population out there who function with a completely different modus operandi or a completely different mindset. Until you're confronted with that reality, where it's undeniable, it might be hard to believe. And I understand why there are a lot of people who just do not wish to accept or face the possibility that there are these groups who are doing these things, that the Illuminati is a very real culture or organization which is very prominent in manipulating what's been happening on our planet. Those that do actually research this will find the evidence is in ample supply. There's a lot of symbolism that we see in the world around us, which is used by occult groups and many of those occult groups are in some way tied to the Illuminati. Now, when I say we're unveiling and understanding the Illuminati, we're looking into a very complex phenomenon, because different people within that organizational structure play different roles and have different ideas and understandings themselves. So it's not a completely unified group of people all thinking and acting the same way. There's even different factions within that general structure who may compete with each other. And their plans and agendas evolve over time. One thing that many people who've observed this group have noticed is that their plans seem to often be delayed. So a lot of people that research conspiracies have leaked information in the past about what they believe the Illuminati agendas are, and many of those agendas actually have unfolded. They have come into reality. However, it's often much later than originally suspected, or in a slightly different way than originally expected. So that shows that they're not an all-powerful group who can do everything they want at will. They have to deal with higher forces that are at work, and they have to deal with the lack of controllability of human nature. Even people under mind control may not be totally controlled. They often break out of that control to some extent. Coming back to the idea of how mind control is applied, we can look at what's happening on a larger scale of society in general, where a lot of stories that were told from our various institutions, whether it's the media, schools, religious institutions, political groups, etc., a lot of that information is false or misleading. Yet most of the population are in some way misled or fooled by it. The very fact that we're not able to see through those deceptions suggests that in some way we need to experience these things to learn. So the shadow side, the dark side, is there giving us opportunities to learn, to understand certain aspects of life and creation. So if we learn to look at things as learning opportunities, as everything happening in our personal world and in the world around us is purposeful and valuable, and we choose not to look at ourselves or anyone else as victims in a greater sense, then we can really empower ourselves. Of course, on the mundane level of society, we see things happening where people appear to be victimized, where we appear to suffer as the result of someone else's abusive actions. Yet, when we look at it from the soul's perspective, from the viewpoint of our higher self, we have come into this reality just for the experiences that are coming into our life. There is a purpose for all of this. People are learning things whether they know it or not. The so-called Illuminati are learning things as well. They may appear to be stuck in a dark or regressive mindset, but many of them are starting to shift their views and evolve. Many of them are starting to see things in different ways as a result of their interaction with the society around them, with the beliefs and viewpoints of people who are not part of their cult. So it's a positive experience if we choose to look at it that way. that we're all here to learn, we're all here to expand our consciousness in one way or another. And ultimately, we are all one. In other words, we are all part of the same source consciousness that has separated or divided or fragmented itself in order to experience life through these many different viewpoints. And therefore, while one person may be in a particular role in their present life, they could be playing the opposite role in a different lifetime. And by having both of those experiences, the soul is able to understand things more deeply and find balance. With this concept of balance, we can use it to look at everything in life, because everything in some way has to accommodate for the ultimate balance that is present in creation. So if something goes too far into one polarity or polarized direction, it's actually feeding into the opposite polarity. As an example, if you are too naive, too easily trusting, too simple-minded, then it's very easy for people to deceive or mislead or exploit you. And you will naturally at some point start to attract those types of individuals who do those things. So you're, in a sense, the extreme of the light polarity, and they are the extreme of the dark polarity. So one polarity feeds into the other. The more in balance you are, the less you will attract those highly polarized experiences. The Illuminati have been around for many, many years, and their knowledge, or wisdom as they may call it, their enlightenment comes from the information and teachings they've received through these secret societies and mystery schools, which can be traced back to information shared by extraterrestrial beings. Those beings helped set up or shape civilizations here on Earth, and in many cases they put into power certain individuals or groups who would in a way act like go-betweens between the Earth Society and the extraterrestrials. In many cases, those extraterrestrials left or detached from their involvement in Earth, at least for a while, leaving those particular elite groups, whether they were royal families or priesthoods, to stay in power and continue to guide the development of that particular society. We still carry a lot of the beliefs and programming which have been passed down from those power structures. This is important to recognize if we wish to pursue true freedom, true personal empowerment, if we desire to create a more balanced and harmonious society, a society where people are not abused and exploited to the extent that they presently are. If we want to make those shifts and changes, it's essential that we learn to forgive. Once we acknowledge and face the ways in which we've been hurt or abused, we don't want to hold on to anger and resentment. We don't want to resist what has happened anymore. We have to face it and confront it and start to choose a different path. When we hold anger and resentment toward things, we're actually feeding energy into those realities. So it's time now to break free, to stop feeding those low vibrational energies, to stop feeding our anger and fear toward those who use anger and fear to manipulate us. As we heal ourselves, as we forgive everyone involved in every experience that we've ever encountered, we set ourselves free to live life fully in the present. In the present is where our true power is. In the present is where we take action to produce change. For those that have looked into the phenomenon of the Illuminati, of the New World Order, of different dark occult groups who may practice things like ritual abuse or pedophilia, blackmail, bribery, etc., we have to realize that these are deeply imbalanced beings. Some of them have been horribly abused themselves, and they have been entrained to see their culture as valid and superior perhaps to the way ordinary everyday people think and live. There's a phenomenon in psychology that's been labeled Stockholm Syndrome, where people who are in some way abused or held hostage may actually develop sympathy and attachment to their captors. This is something that has occurred on a larger scale, with much of humanity giving their power and allegiance to people and groups that are actually abusing and exploiting them. If we wish those things to change, it's time for us to face reality, to not be in denial, to confront the feeling of betrayal, the pain, the sadness, the grief that may arise as we recognize the things that have happened. If we don't face those things, then we cannot truly heal them. Some of you are familiar with the phrase, "the truth shall set you free." Well, the truth is indeed an important step in our healing and in our path to freedom. I encourage everyone to not just blindly take my word for anything, to not be a follower, but instead to do your own research, to examine all the information that different people are sharing, all the personal stories, and to form your own conclusions. Recognize that none of us have the whole picture about anything. We each get to experience only a small slice of a very small slice of a very small slice of reality. Beyond what we see with our five senses, there are other dimensions, other layers of reality. And in this five-sense world, each person is having their own unique experience, their own small field of awareness through which they're exploring things. So even though I might not personally be someone living within a cult and subjected to the activities they're involved in, that doesn't mean that that cult doesn't exist and that those things are not happening. So I have to be able to be open to listening and hearing what other people who've shared those experiences have to inform us about, to take that information into account. Now, I'm a holistic therapist. In that work that I do as a therapist, I work a lot with hypnosis, with energy healing, with mind-body healing modalities. And that means I study a lot about how our mind works, how our energy field, our energy circuits and energy centers function, the relationships between the body, mind, and spirit. That has given me some additional insight into a lot of this information about esoteric matters, about secret societies, about extraterrestrials, about dissociative identities, even the idea of shape-shifting. I've studied some of the material that's been created that's designed to help people break free of different forms of mind control programming. Some of the methods involve working with sound and color, with meditation, with hypnosis, with energy psychology. There's a variety of techniques that can be helpful, but first it's vital to know what you're delving into, how these different patterns of dissociation function. For me, the core of healing resides on the spiritual plane. It has to do with our deepest beliefs about life and reality, about who we truly are, about who or what the Creator is, and how each of us individually relates to that higher source. When we feel whole and content within ourselves, fully loving and appreciating our innermost being, it's hard for other people to manipulate us. That's something I encourage everyone to remember, to find that place of peace, that place of wholeness, that place of love and harmony that's within yourself. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, for taking this brief period of your life that you're listening or watching this to explore these ideas and these topics. It takes courage and bravery sometimes to look into a subject that many people feel threatened or disturbed by. So I applaud you for your courage, for your openness and willingness to explore, to expand your consciousness. To close this presentation, I'm going to relate a couple of personal experiences, stories of people that I've encountered who have had interactions with what we would consider to be Illuminati type activity. The first is a story that relates to a woman who I met in the year 2001. This woman is now deceased. She was a Buddhist spiritual teacher, to kind of summarize what role she was playing here on earth. She taught some of the Buddhist teachings about non-duality, giving satsangs, and also teaching yoga, working with meditation. She also worked with Reiki, which relates to how I first met her. And her name is Clara Loom, or Clara Loom Ibanez. I met Clara at a Reiki circle at the Conversations with God Center here in Miami in November of 2001. At that time, she had just come to live here in America. Her fiancé was American, so she came from Spain here to America to be with him. and she was someone who was a very gentle, genuine type of person, someone who was soft-spoken, the kind of person you might expect to be teaching Buddhist teachings. She developed a particular genre or lineage of Reiki called Kuan Yin Reiki. And Kuan Yin, of course, is the goddess of compassion from the Eastern tradition. So we can see that she was someone who was very devoted to spirituality, to healing and compassion. Now, jumping forward a few years to the year 2004, we were both facilitators of events at this center, which had evolved from the Conversations with God Center to be an independent spiritual center. And one time when I was attending a satsang, a gathering with her there, at the end of it, we had a private conversation where she asked me about David Icke, because she had seen online that he was a writer that I was interested in. And then she began to relate a story to me which she was actually very uncomfortable and uneasy with. It was a story that kind of spooked her. Back in February of 2001, when she was still in Spain, she had been approached by a man who was presenting himself as someone who was looking to have books from a certain publisher offered in her spiritual center for sale for the public. So he had gotten in contact with her and arranged to meet with her under that presumptive reason. So as she met with him and became acquainted with him, he then began to reveal the true reason for why he was there to connect or meet with her. And what he explained to her and demonstrated to her in some specific ways was that he was an operative for this global government organization which had sent him to essentially spy on or surveil her and her operation, her business. He showed her that he had access to all of her email, all of her communication, and basically he had come to conclude that her center, her particular spiritual business there, was really not of any concern to them. It wasn't any obstacle or threat to their agenda. Now, if it had been, we don't know what he might have chosen to do at that point. But what he did at this point was he actually offered to recruit her. So he gave her a recruitment offer to join this organization that he worked with, which would provide for getting to travel around the world, receiving a rather high income. So it would be a kind of lucrative position if you're interested in those material rewards, which she wasn't. And she explained to him that she was going to be moving to America in September of 2001. And when she explained this to him, he essentially leaked to her that he had been told or was made aware that there was an operation of a terrorist type nature being planned for America in September 2001. So of course, moving ahead to that time when she did come to America in September, and the events of September 11, the World Trade Center, and the Pentagon occurred, she was rather freaked out, and she could see, looking on TV at what was being shown, that these World Trade Center buildings were being brought down in a controlled demolition. The airplanes striking them really didn't explain at all how the buildings came down. So it was pretty apparent that the story presented to the public was a deception. Now, if we consider that the media is telling us a false story, the government is telling us a false story, and there's this organization that was planning this whole operation in advance, who are also planning to bring into being this global government, then we can see that there's a pretty pervasive, powerful force at work. That gentleman back in Spain had also told her how this organization was structured and to some extent how it functioned. And what he told her was that at the top of that organization there were 13 families who were kind of the ruling powers of that structure, and that there were also other beings beyond them, and that there were off-world meetings which occurred. So it obviously implies an extraterrestrial connection. So this earthly power structure is operating in some way in connection to or in tandem with some extraterrestrial influence. This is what this gentleman told Clara. And she was so unnerved by that she hadn't really spoken of it to anyone. It was just a few years later that she began to share it with me, when she learned that I was already interested in and aware of this type of subject or information. I would like to thank Clara for her candor, for her willingness to share about what she experienced. And of course I send her spirit my peace and blessings. For those that would like to really experience some well-presented teachings on spirituality, on non-duality, on the nature of consciousness, you can find a webpage that's devoted to her satsang and her other materials. Now, one other story that I'll share relates to someone who is still alive, someone whose name I will not share to protect his privacy. But this is a person who is Cuban American, whose family came from Cuba, and they settled here in the Miami area. He came from a background where the family was deeply involved in secret societies, starting there in Cuba. And from things he revealed to me and from what we were able to uncover under hypnosis, it became apparent that he was part of some type of mind control project when he was a child, which was both programming him to dissociate as well as programming him to develop extensive or exceptional extrasensory abilities. So to be kind of a psychic super soldier. I won't go into too much detail about that, but for those that are interested in learning about those types of programs, you can read about the Montauk Project, you can read about super soldiers, you can visit a website called Project Camelot, which has some of the whistleblower testimonies on that subject. this gentleman that I'm acquainted with, in his training, it was related to a secret society where they used different forms of drugs and torture and things like that to force or mold the child's behavior. This person was given certain trigger commands, and by that what I mean is when the person would hear a certain word or phrase or song, something like that, they would switch into an altered state of consciousness or an altered personality. This type of programming is common in the MK Ultra type mind control projects. If you read the works of Stuart Swerdlow, of Fritz Springmeier, of Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor, and also a woman who published online under the pseudonym Zvali, that's spelled S-V-A-L-I, you'll see how these different trigger phrases, trigger images, and items are used in the programming process. Often there are colors, there are words, there are gemstones, there are phrases that are used to help people switch into those different identities. They're cues. In hypnosis, it's very common to use cues or triggers to help people switch into a particular state that you desire for them to switch into. So in those particular programs that are used to manipulate people, they're using it for that purpose. There's someone who might be called a programmer or handler who knows the specific codes and triggers that have been programmed into that person's mind, and they can use them to push that person's buttons, in a sense, to guide them to do whatever they might want that person to do. So when I used hypnosis, I did it with the awareness that this person might have that type of programming. Sometimes people who are hypnotists use hypnosis with programmed people, and they open a can of worms that they're not ready to deal with, because the types of programming involved can be rather complex and can also program the person or trigger the person to act in very destructive ways when their programming starts to be opened up. So some caution would be needed, and sometimes it would be better to use methods besides hypnosis to help that person access what's in their unconscious and help them reintegrate their identity. There have been a number of movies that have been made on the subject of mind control and programming and multiple personalities. There's The Three Faces of Eve, there's the Manchurian Candidate movies, there's Sybil, there's also the movie Identity, which was a more recent one, a movie starring John Cusack, Ray Liotta, and some other well-known actors and actresses. In that movie, you'll see that the main character is actually not the character you're seeing throughout most of the movie. The characters you're seeing in the movie are actually the different alternate personalities playing a drama out within his own mind. And they're not conscious that they're all just different fragments or different sub-personalities within one person. Each one of them sees themselves as a separate identity. And that's how different identities can function in a person who has that level of dissociation. for people that are working on healing from that, the forgiveness process is really valuable because it helps them get beyond the state of victimhood. So we don't want to live our whole life as a victim. We need to get past that and empower ourselves and feel safe and comfortable within our own identity and confident about our ability to live our life freely and fully. I will conclude this presentation with that note. I may offer additional talks on this topic as it's a very complex topic, a topic that I've been researching for approximately 20 years. So to put 20 years of research and observations into a 30-minute or 1-hour presentation is not easy. I appreciate you bearing with me as I share these things, and I wish every one of you all the best. Namaste.